You think your life is hard? Try being your own great-great-great-grandparent. Because statistically, you shouldn't exist at all. If you take a second to actually think about it, your entire existence is a glitch, a bug in the system, a 4 billion year streak of someone not dying at the worst possible moment. Every single person in your family tree survived long enough to make a baby. And I'm not talking about survived like they had a tough day at the office and needed a coffee. I mean, they survived plagues, predators, famines, wars, ice ages, volcanic winters, and their own terrible decision-making. And then, after all of that, they had to convince another human being to look at them naked and say, yeah, that works for me, which, honestly, might be the most impressive part. Let's do the math. I promise it's the only math you'll ever enjoy. You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, 32, 64, 128. It doubles every single generation. By generation 10, you have over 1,000 ancestors. By generation 20, you have over 1 million ancestors. By generation 30, you have over 1 billion ancestors. By generation 40, you have over 1 trillion ancestors. Here's the problem. There have not been 1 trillion humans in all of history. There haven't even been 100 billion. So what happened? Did your ancestors invent cloning, time travel, some kind of prehistoric duplication glitch? No, incest. Well, technically, pedigree collapse. Your family tree isn't a tree, it's a wreath, it's a pretzel. It's a loop-de-loop where branches fold back into each other because, for most of human history, there were only like 12 people in your village, and 3 of them were already related. If you're of European descent, Charlemagne is probably your ancestor. So is literally everyone else from the year 800 who managed to reproduce. You're not special because you're related to royalty. You're related to royalty because royalty was the only people who could afford to have kids that survived. Everyone else is in there too. The baker, the guy who cleaned out the stables, the woman who got hit by a cart and somehow only lost a toe. Your DNA is a participation trophy for humanity's incredibly small dating pool. But it gets weirder. Mathematicians figured out something called the identical ancestors point. Go back about 5,000 years, and every single person alive on Earth who has any descendants today is an ancestor of everyone alive today. That means the same guy who invented the wheel, the same woman who first figured out wheat, and the same weirdo who looked at a cow and thought, I'm gonna drink whatever comes out of that, is all of our ancestors. You are related to literally every human on Earth. The only difference between you and a stranger on the other side of the planet is which ancestors you got more of. So yeah, racism is extra stupid when you realize everyone's family reunion is the same party. But let's talk about the survivors, because every single one of your ancestors lived long enough to reproduce. In a world where, for most of history, half of all kids died before age 5. Half. Flip a coin. Heads, you die screaming from an infection that modern medicine fixes with a $5 prescription. Tails, you get to grow up, smell terrible, and eventually become someone's awkward ancestor. Your direct bloodline has a perfect survival record going back thousands of generations. Do you understand how statistically deranged that is? You are the result of a winning streak that makes the Harlem Globetrotters look like amateurs. Let's go back, way back, before humans, before apes, before anything with a spine. Your lineage goes back to a single-celled organism that didn't get eaten by its neighbor. That's ancestor number 1, a blob that had the audacity to divide instead of die. Fast forward a few 100 million years, your ancestor was a fish that didn't get stepped on by a trilobite. Then it was a lizard that saw a bird and thought nope instead of snack. Then it was a tiny mammal hiding in a hole while dinosaurs had their worst day ever. That little rat-looking thing in a burrow covered in dirt eating bugs, that's your great times a million grandparent. If it had sneezed and alerted a predator, you wouldn't be here. But it didn't. It kept its mouth shut. It stayed small, it stayed hidden, and because of that one anxious rat, you exist. Then we get to actual humans, early humans. Your ancestors survived childhood in an era where childhood was basically a boss fight with no checkpoints, no vaccines, no antibiotics, no maybe let's wash the knife before we cut the umbilical cord, just mud, hope, and a 1 in 2 chance of making it to your first birthday. Every single parent in your line successfully kept a kid alive long enough for that kid to make another kid for thousands of generations. That's not skill, that's a miracle stacked on top of a miracle, covered in a light layer of dumb luck. They survived predators that could run faster, see better, smell better, and were definitely not scared of sticks. Your ancestors had no claws, no fur, no night vision, and a top speed of moderately brisk jog. A saber-toothed cat could outrun them, outclimb them, and probably outsmart them. Cave bears were twice the size of modern grizzlies. Short-faced bears could look into a second-story window. There were cave hyenas the size of lions. Haast's eagles in New Zealand hunted actual humans. But your ancestor was just slightly better at throwing rocks, or slightly better at hiding in a bush, or slightly better at not being the slowest person in the group. That's it. The bar for survival was don't be the worst one here, and your ancestor every single time was at least the second worst. They survived plagues that wiped out entire cities. The Black Death killed something like 1/3 of Europe. But not your ancestor. Your ancestor either had an immune system that was slightly less terrible than average, or they lived on a hill, or they were a rat farmer who somehow never got bitten. The Justinian plague survived. Smallpox survived. Cholera survived. The 1918 flu survived. Every single microscopic murderer that history threw at your bloodline bounced off. Your DNA is basically a resume of viruses that tried and failed. They survived wars where people literally stood in lines and shot at each other, or charged at each other with sharp metal, or got conscripted by Genghis Khan or hid in a ditch while Genghis Khan rode past. Your ancestors weren't all heroes. Some of them were probably the quartermasters who counted grain and never saw battle. Some of them were too short to be cavalry. Some of them had flat feet. Some of them were cowards, and cowards live. That's not an insult, that's biology. The person who runs away gets to have kids, the hero gets a statue and 0 descendants. They survived the Toba supervolcano eruption about 70,000 years ago, which dropped the entire human population down to maybe 3,000 people, maybe 10,000. We almost went extinct. Your ancestors were in that tiny group of survivors. They were the world's most exclusive VIP list, and they didn't even know it. They were just sitting in a cave somewhere, coughing from volcanic ash, wondering why the sun looked weird and why everything tasted like metal. They survived ice ages wearing dead animals. They survived crossing oceans in boats that were basically wooden bathtubs with a superiority complex. They survived winters without heat, summers without air conditioning, and somehow still had to look attractive while covered in mud, blood, and dead animal smell. They survived infections before antibiotics existed. They survived childbirth before doctors figured out hand washing. They survived broken bones that healed crooked and teeth that rotted out of their skulls. They survived famines where the average person looked like a skeleton wearing skin as a loose outfit. And then we get to the modern era. Your ancestors survived the Industrial Revolution, which was basically an era where everything was made of lead and on fire. They survived cars with no seatbelts. They survived doctors smoking in the delivery room. They survived an era where radiation was considered healthy and people drank radium water for fun. They survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the invention of the telephone, which meant they could now receive bad news faster than ever before. And then after all of that, after surviving every horror the universe could invent, they had to find a mate. Think about this. No deodorant, no toothpaste, no shampoo, no what's your type, no dating apps, no concept of emotional availability. Just a small group of people who all smelled like smoke, bear grease, and poor life choices, and your ancestor had to convince one of them to reproduce. Maybe it was arranged by their parents. Maybe it was a trade involving 2 goats and a clay pot. Maybe your ancestor was just the least disgusting option in a 30-mile radius. Maybe they got married at 14 because that was just Tuesday in the year 1400. But it worked, every single time, for thousands of generations, until they made you. But here's the thing nobody tells you. They weren't heroes. Your ancestors weren't the strongest, smartest, or bravest. They were just the ones who didn't die that particular Tuesday. History remembers the winners. The generals, the kings, the explorers. But your family tree isn't made of winners. It's made of people who were in the right place at the right time, with the right immune system, and slightly better balance than the guy who fell into the river. One of your ancestors survived a plague because they had a head cold and stayed home the day. Their village got raided. Another survived because they were too ugly to be worth stealing. Another survived a battle because they twisted their ankle the night before and had to sit in a tent counting bandages. Another survived because they were boring. Just aggressively, impressively boring, not worth executing, not worth enslaving, just background noise in human history. And that background noise is your entire origin story. Your ancestor during the Black Death wasn't a noble physician. They were a peasant who lived on a hill and didn't go to the market that week. Your ancestor during the war wasn't a decorated soldier. They were the guy who got assigned to guard the latrines and caught dysentery instead of a bullet. Your ancestor during the famine was the one who found a hidden potato. That's it, 1 potato. We think they were special because we're here, but that's survivorship bias. The cemeteries are full of people with better stories. The hero who saved the village and then got tetanus from a rusty nail. The genius inventor who ate a bad mushroom. The strongest warrior who slipped on a rock and broke his neck. Your ancestors weren't better than them. They were just luckier, or shorter, or more forgettable. The chain that made you isn't a chain of champions. It's a chain of people who were too stubborn, too lucky, or too boring to kill. It's a chain of people who looked at a saber-toothed cat and ran the other way. It's a chain of people who said, "I'll sit this one out," and then outlived everyone who didn't. So the next time you feel useless, remember, you are the result of a 4 billion-year winning streak, a streak that started with a cell dividing in some primordial soup and ended with you, sitting on a stained couch, holding a phone, probably procrastinating on something important. And if you don't have kids, that streak ends with you. No pressure.